for the immune system, in the past, I've done it more as questions that lead your study and understanding of it. But I will do a little video lesson that kind of covers the main topics that we did through the question and answer session. So, the first part was just getting used to some of the terms and what they mean. So, the first term was the immune system itself. So we're going to take a closer look at the immune system and what is involved in the immune system. I added a couple of little parts and a graphic on here this year just so you can understand a little better what they mean when they talk about the immune system. So the job of the immune system is basically this is the first point, to distinguish harmless and harmful organisms, so self versus foreign, within your body, and then deal with both in an efficient way so as not to pose a risk to your health. It's comprised of a variety of white blood cells and proteins that help to recognize and attack the foreign invaders or pathogens, such as bacteria and viruses, and damaged cells and irregular growths. It also involves certain tissues and organs that help to filter the debris and pathogens out of the fluids that pass near them. So, I don't know how well you can see this picture, but maybe I'll make it a little bigger just while we talk about it. So some of the filters that we have include our adenoids and tonsils, which often might be swollen, maybe the reason that they swell is if you are feeling sick, then they get bigger because they're filling with the stuff that they're filtering. Okay, so a lot of people, if they have bigger than normal adenoids and tonsils, might have trouble breathing at nighttime and things like that. They might snore more often than others, for instance. But they have an important... Oh, what happened? Try that again. They have an important job in filtering debris and pathogens as they enter the respiratory tract. So as you're breathing in through your mouth and nose, then they try to help clear out some of the debris and pathogens that are entering. Now, in your digestive tract, we have, so of course, they would help trap things that are coming in through your mouth, so the tonsils would help in that area. But we also have lymph nodes along there too. And we have, along the digestive tract, we have Peyer's patches. I think that's supposed to be Peyers, which is in your small intestine. I don't think they're on this picture. But also your appendix. And your appendix is a little part that kind of comes off of the first part of the large intestine. And we'll look at it in a little more detail when we get to the digestive system. But they help to kind of filter things as they enter the digestive tract. So they're helping to get rid of debris and pathogens there. You just finished learning about the lymphatic system. So the green lines are showing lymphatic vessels, but the swellings along those lines are all lymph nodes. And all those lymph nodes help out in filtering debris and pathogens. So they are considered a part of the immune system too. And your spleen. Part of your spleen's job is to filter out lymph and to filter out blood. And it's also important in when your thymus gland gets smaller as you age, it kind of helps to take over the role of the thymus gland. Okay, so that's some of them blown up. Other parts that are important include your thymus gland, which is a butterfly-shaped gland that sits right around here. Okay, so just above where your heart and lungs are. And that is really big when you're little, when your immune system is just starting to develop, and it gets smaller as you age. So its job, it is the site where T lymphocytes will mature. Okay, so T cells, when we talk about the T cells in the immune system, they have matured in the thymus gland. That's why they call them T cells. Okay, and they're involved in cellular immunity. Now your bone marrow is at the center of your bones, and it is the site of the stem cells that are important for production of all blood cells, including white blood cells, so all these lymphocytes and all the other white blood cells that are involved in your immune system. Their stem cells are located in your bone marrow. Okay, and the bone marrow is also the site of maturation of the B lymphocytes, so that's where they get the name B lymphocytes. So the B lymphocytes are important in humoral, or what we call antibody immunity. So if it involves antibodies, then it involves B cells, the B lymphocytes. So that's an overview of the immune system. These are some of the other terms that are important for you to understand. Okay, so the next one is immunity, and basically immunity is the ability to resist a disease after being exposed to it in the past. So after we're exposed to something, we tend to develop a bit of an immunity to it if your immune system is functioning well. A pathogen, we just mentioned or talked about briefly, is a disease-causing agent. So it could be a bacteria, a virus, a fungus, protists. There's lots of other types of agents that can cause disease. Antigens are basically things on the outside of cells or pathogens or debris or things that are recognized by our body cells. Our body cells would we could say look at them if they had eyes, but basically our body cells would be able to recognize whatever it is as being foreign. Okay, so it's something on the outside that triggers an immune response in our body. It might be, most of them are proteins. So proteins are other large molecules that are on the surface of that unfamiliar cell or non-self cell that makes the body respond, makes the immune system kind of want to attack it. So a lot of allergens, for instance, would be considered antigens or have antigens on them. Antibodies are what we make. Okay, so our immune system, when we are exposed to something foreign, our immune system will make what we call antibodies, and antibodies are special proteins. Okay, so I'm going to blow this up here so you can see it a little better. So an antibody is a special protein where this whitish blue part would be consistent in every single antibody, but they have unique parts at the ends that are able to match up with or kind of bind with the antigen. So let's say this is a protein, the yellow one is a protein on the outside of some foreign cell or some foreign organism or something that's in the body that we don't want to be there. Then our body makes an antibody, so it makes proteins that have a binding region on it that matches up. So they can go and bind to them and help your other body cells recognize them as being foreign and to attack them. Okay, so all the antibodies have a common area that's the same in all of them, but then it has a region that's specific to an antigen. So everything that we have been exposed to, we develop an antibody to it, and each one would have its own antibody. So we have a lot of different antibodies floating around in us. Okay, we don't have a lot of copies of them all the time, but we do have a lot of different ones, and that's why we each have a unique bunch of antibodies, because we're not all exposed to all the same things. So like it says here, it's a Y-shaped protein that is produced and used by the immune system to recognize foreign or non-self objects so they can be neutralized. So that other cells can either engulf them and break them down or somehow make it so that they won't harm our bodies. They contain regions that are constant and regions that are unique and bind only to one particular antigen. Okay, so it's antigen specific on the surface of the foreign object. The next question said, describe the two main groups of defenses. So non-specific and specific. Okay, so we have non-specific that don't require a certain thing to kind of trigger them to happen. They're just going to happen and help us to defend against anything that comes our way. And then we have specific, where it's more directed. Okay, so there's something that our body recognizes, and we're going to attack it because we can recognize it. So, the non-specific defenses, like I just said, they defend against a wide variety of pathogens, and their effectiveness does not depend on prior exposure. So these ones are going to kick in if anything foreign comes in. Okay, the first line of defense is our skin. Our skin is our biggest organ, and it is pretty hard to get through it. Okay, so unless there's a little break in our skin, if there's a little cut or something like that, then usually things can't get through. But if there is a cut, then they could. So it has a tough keratin layer that's hard to penetrate, but it also has bactericides in the oil that we produce. So there, in the oil, there's different chemicals that can kill some of the pathogens that might try to get in through our skin. We also produce acid in our sweat. So our skin has special bactericides and acids that can help to try and kill these things before they even enter or try to enter our body. We also have mucus and cilia along the linings of our respiratory and digestive tracts. The mucus and cilia help to kind of trap. The mucus will help to trap, and the cilia helps to kind of try and sweep it away. Remember, the cilia are the tiny little hair-like things that kind of will move like little oars and try and brush things along and help us to get rid of them. The walls of our stomach are also important because they produce acid, and the acid, our stomach is really acidic, so it helps to destroy pathogens that come in our food stuff before they have a chance to get into our body cells. Okay, so before they can kind of enter and affect our body at all, then we try and destroy them in there, so that it's really acidic, like pH 3 or 4 in your stomach. Macrophages, neutrophils, monocytes, and killer cells all will engulf foreign things, okay? So they'll undergo phagocytosis, and they'll extend part of their cell around them, and then they'll have lysosomes in them to help break them down. So they are non-specific, and they will go and basically it's like little Pac-Men. They go and they try and chase down the foreign bodies and engulf them. In terms of specific immunity, this includes a wide variety of cells that recognize foreign substances and act to neutralize or destroy them. So in order to recognize them, they depend on prior exposure, because they depend on antibodies and memory cells, which help us to respond quicker. Okay, so the whole idea of our immune system is if we've been exposed to something once, we make sure that we can recognize it again. So we make these antibodies and memory cells so that we can recognize them a lot faster next time and attack them right away. So this type of immunity involves the T and B lymphocytes. Okay, whereas the other was the non-specific and involved other things, other properties of your skin and your mucous membranes that are lining your different tracts and things like that. But this type of immunity requires specific white blood cells that are going to help in recognizing and attacking right away. Every person's specific immune system is unique, since we've all been exposed to a different combination of pathogens and foreign objects. So we have a different cocktail of antibodies floating around in our blood. The next one, would be a little bit easier if I put a little shade. So the next one says, where did T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes get their names? There's a little animation, and I will include that on the site as well. I might show it here just so you can see it. That's my little fella ringing a cowbell. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but he's cheering for his show that he's watching right now. Oh, what's happening with our sound? The sound's not working. Okay, so I will link it, but it's a really good little animation to help you understand where they get their names and a little bit more about them. So basically, they're both produced in the bone marrow, but they mature in different locations, and that's how they're named. So T lymphocytes, the T is for thymus gland. They mature in the thymus gland. B lymphocytes mature in the bone marrow. And so we mentioned this briefly earlier, but just wanted to point it out again. The next question said, review the diagram on page 383 in your textbook, and then briefly outline the body's overall immune system. So what's the first line of defense? We talked about it earlier, but we'll talk about it quickly again. The second line of defense and the third line of defense, so we can kind of see the overall picture of how it works. So first line of defense, in quick terms, mainly your skin. It acts as a barrier. It's inhospitable to many pathogens. So remember that it makes bactericides and it makes acid, and it's really hard to pass through. The linings of your respiratory and digestive tract, remember, the mucus traps, and then the cilia will sweep things out. Your stomach produces acid that helps to break down the pathogens that come in our food. So that's mainly your first line of defense. Second line of defense, the first and second are really the non-specific things. Okay, so the second line of defense are macrophages and other cells that will undergo phagocytosis and engulf and destroy the invaders. Okay, and when they do so, we produce pus. So the leftover stuff from the white blood cells and what they've broken down, that is pus. So it's a sign that your immune system is trying to work, but it also is a sign that you've got a little bit of an infection going on. There's also non-phagocytic, can't even speak today, non-phagocytic white blood cells. So another kind of white blood cell basically that arrives at the site and releases histamine. So, you've heard of antihistamines before, I'm pretty sure, but this is why you sometimes take antihistamines. So, when histamine is released at a site of, foreigners that are entering or inside the body, this is what it causes. It causes increased blood flow to the area, so it's going to kind of get a little redder. Increased permeability to white blood cells so that they can pass out into the area where they need to engulf the foreigners. Okay, so that just means that they have an easier time of getting out of the capillaries. So when they need to get out where they're going to attack the foreign invaders. And there's also an increased temperature in the region. So those are all things that happen when histamine is released. The third line of defense is the more specific part. Okay, so antigens are shown through the surface of the macrophage. So the macrophage engulfs those foreigners, and it takes those little pieces from on the outside of the foreigner, and it sticks them out on the outside of the macrophage. And we're going to take a look at some graphics that would be a lot easier to see. But if you look on page 383, it's showing this in the pictures. So the antigens shown, they're kind of being presented to the rest of your body in a safe way. So the macrophage has already engulfed it, okay, but it's taking little pieces of it and sticking it out so that your body is able to make note of what those pieces are and make antibodies to them, okay? So they show on the outside of the macrophage, the helper T cells are going to bind to the antigens and trigger release of chemical messengers. The T cells multiply, and some will destroy the infected tissue and pathogen when they're bound. So those are cytotoxic T cells, so killer T cells. And the B cells, B lymphocytes with antibodies will bind to the antigens. The helper T cells bind to the B cell antibody antigen complex, causing the B cell to enlarge and divide. The B cell divides, producing a plasma or effector B cell, which produces antibodies, and a memory cell, which stays in the blood ready to fight that same pathogen if it invades again. Okay, so I think it's going to remember for next time. Free antibodies float around in the blood, marking pathogens and foreign bodies for macrophages to attack. So that is what happens after we've made some antibodies. Here's a little animation. Hopefully this one will work okay. Oh, I've got my speakers muted. That might be why. I couldn't hear it, but you could. What happened here? There we go. This one will work.
Activation of the immune response typically begins when a pathogen enters the body. Macrophages that encounter the pathogen ingest, process, and display the antigen fragments on their cell surfaces.
That's
Macrophages
the
with antigen
presenting
fragments
part.
displayed on their surfaces are called antigen-presenting cells. An antigen-presenting macrophage interacts with a T helper cell that can recognize the same antigen. During the interaction, the macrophage releases a chemical alarm signal called interleukin-1, which stimulates the T helper cell to secrete interleukin-2. Interleukin-2 causes the proliferation of certain cytotoxic T cells and B cells. The immune response from this point follows two paths, one using cytotoxic T cells and one using B cells. Normal cells of the body that become infected can also digest some of the pathogens and display antigen fragments on their cell surfaces. The body makes millions of different types of cytotoxic T cells. Each type is able to recognize a particular antigen. The cytotoxic T cells that are capable of recognizing the antigen displayed on the surfaces of infected cells bind to the infected cells and produce chemicals that kill the infected cell. Death of the infected cells results in destruction of the pathogen. B cells also come in millions of different types, each able to recognize a particular antigen. When B cells become activated by T helper cells, they differentiate into plasma cells. These plasma cells become antibody-producing factories, flooding the bloodstream with antibodies that can bind to the antigen involved in this infection. Antibodies bind to the antigens on the surfaces of the pathogens, marking them for destruction by macrophages. Some of the B cells do not turn into antibody factories, but instead become memory B cells that may survive for several decades. Because of these memory B cells, the secondary immune response to a future infection by the same pathogen is swifter and stronger. This powerful secondary immune response is what gives immunity to some diseases after you have had them once or after you have been vaccinated.
It's a lot easier to understand when you see it a few times and kind of look back and read over again and then watch the animation again. In terms of being able to tell the difference between the two pathways that could be taken, so you saw in that animation that one pathway was with the cytotoxic T cells and the other pathway was with the B cells. So those two pathways are basically what we're talking about in this one. So there's cellular immunity and there's antibody or humoral immunity. Okay, so the cellular immunity was the first one that was shown in that animation, okay, where the helper T cell binds and then chemicals, the interleukins are released. So there's a chemical message that's sent out and there's proliferation or a whole bunch of cells being made that are called the cytotoxic T cells or killer cells that will go and bind to the antigens and then release chemicals that will kill them. Okay, so that is the cellular immunity. It involves T cells. Now, the humoral or antibody immunity involves, like it says, production of antibodies. Okay, so for production of antibodies to happen, it's the B lymphocytes that are involved. Okay, so one difference you could talk about is what type of cells are involved. Is it the B lymphocytes or the T lymphocytes? Are antibodies involved or not? So cellular immunity doesn't involve antibodies, but humoral immunity does. So in this case, the antibodies bind to the antigens, okay, that are on the infected cells or on the pathogens, and it marks them. See, they're binding, the antibodies are binding to the pathogens, and that marks them so that macrophages and other engulfing cells can come and engulf them and break them down. Okay? So, cellular involves T cells. They bind and release chemicals that will destroy the infected cells, whereas humoral involves production of antibodies that mark the cells so that they can be engulfed and broken down by other cells of the immune system, the macrophages and such. Okay, the next question said, briefly explain the two ways that immunity is provided and give examples of each. So we can have passive immunity, which is it's just happens. It's induced naturally in us. Or we can have active immunity, which is induced by medical intervention. So passive immunity means receiving antibodies from another person to combat a disease. So that could be through infection, or it could be through passive transfer. So for example, from your mom. Okay, in breast milk, that's why they talk about the first 6 months when the baby's immune system hasn't developed yet really, then breast milk is important for the baby because it can provide antibodies against a lot of pathogens. Okay, so antibodies are, again, really important for us to recognize the pathogens and be able to attack them quicker. Active immunity includes things like when we have a vaccine. If we get immunized or given a needle with a vaccine in it, the vaccine contains bits of the pathogen, so the antigens. Okay, so things that are usually found on the outside of the pathogen, and it's not the whole pathogen, otherwise it would make us sick, but just the bits on the outside of it. So if it's broken up and then you just get little bits of the proteins that are on the surface, then our body can make antibodies to it, and then our body can recognize it when the real thing comes into our body, and we can attack it faster. So this animation is about vaccines, and it's from the
Ouch!
Vaccinations are injections of antigens into the body. The antigens in the vaccine are shown here in green. Once they enter the blood, the antigens circulate along with other cells, such as B and T cells. B and T cells are white blood cells that help the body defend itself against foreign invaders. As the antigens invade the body's tissues, they attract the attention of macrophages. Macrophages are non-specific scavengers, which in this case engulf the antigens. The macrophages then signal the T cells that antigens are invading. The killer type of T cells respond by attacking the invading antigen. Finally, the suppressor T cells stop the attack. The end result is that after a vaccination, the body will have a lasting memory of an encounter with a potentially dangerous invader, and hopefully have a better ability to fight it off if ever exposed to it again in greater numbers.
Question 7 says, what do we mean when we say a certain disease is an autoimmune disease? And list 4 examples. So basically, an autoimmune disease is a disease in which our immune system starts attacking our own body. Okay? We're recognizing something in our own body as being foreign when it's really part of ourselves. And so our body attacks itself. It causes inflammation and swelling and buildup of white blood cells, trying to get rid of what it thinks is foreign. Okay, so our T cells or antibodies are mistakenly attack our body's own tissues as if they were foreign. So some examples include rheumatoid arthritis. So rheumatoid arthritis affects the joints like arthritis, but it's a different way of affecting. So in this case, the body is recognizing something in the lining of the joints as being foreign. And so it attacks them, and it causes pain and swelling, and often it causes it to become malformed or in a different kind of shape if it continues. And so it can come and go and be sporadic, but your body is attacking itself because it thinks that those parts are foreign. Lupus and rheumatoid arthritis are often hard to tell between at first. I think they're getting better at diagnosing them now, but they both cause a lot of pain, and it's kind of sporadic. It happens and then it goes away, and it happens, and but it depends on the person's situation. So there's kind of a spectrum of levels within these diseases. So lupus is one where it's pain in the muscles and the bones. One of the other kind of symptoms that is often associated with it is a rash. It's called a butterfly rash on the nose and cheeks, but not everyone has them, so sometimes it's harder to tell if it's maybe rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or one of the other autoimmune diseases that are similar. Okay, so multiple sclerosis, or MS, is one where the body is attacking a special coating called the myelin sheath, which is a special insulating coating around the outside of your nerves. And so it destroys this coating, and if you can imagine and the wires that are running through your house, if the insulating plastic around them is disturbed, then it can cause problems with the relay of the electricity through the wire. So it's the same kind of thing in our bodies. If that insulation is destroyed, then it interferes with proper nerve signals, and so it causes it can be very progressive and debilitating for some, and other people it comes and goes, but it can get to the point where a person may lose the ability to coordinate their movements and walking. They can lose the ability for their mind functioning properly and thinking through things and talking, and so it depends on again, there's a bit of a spectrum with this disease, and some people have a milder level of symptoms that may get stronger as they age with it, but that it comes and goes. Others, it's very debilitating and more progressive. So the last one is myasthenia gravis, and in that one, the primary area that's targeted by our immune system is where your nervous system is telling your muscles what to do. So the muscles end up weakening, and it can kind of come and go as well. So the legs and arms muscles, but also the muscles controlling breathing and talking and all of those things. So it can cause weakening of the muscles that can come and go. So those are some of the autoimmune diseases that are known. What is an allergy, and what are the two types of allergic reactions? So an allergy is basically an exaggerated response by the immune system to a harmless material, such as pollen, mold, or cat dander, that your body is taking to be foreign. Okay, there are two types of allergic reactions. The first is immediate or acute, which is the most common. It occurs within seconds, usually disappears within 30 minutes. Antibodies trigger certain cells to release histamine. Remember, histamines are the chemicals that increase permeability of the capillaries so that the white blood cells can go out into the area where it thinks that there's foreigners, and makes the area red and warm and swollen. It also triggers release of cellular fluids, so it causes you to have watery eyes and runny nose. All of these things are ways that your body tries to get pathogens or things that it thinks are foreign out. So you're crying it out, your nose is trying to run it out. All those things are happening so that you can try and rid your body of these things it doesn't think should be there. The most common way of trying to treat allergies is by taking antihistamines. So antihistamines would interfere with the release of histamines and what they normally do. Okay? And some forms of asthma are triggered by such things. So, and with that, the primary area where the immune system is attacking is in the respiratory tract, and so it makes it really difficult for them to breathe because there's all these white blood cells and inflamed area around the breathing tubes, swelling, and it makes it hard to breathe. Second type is delayed, and I don't believe nope, this is just another graphic showing the immune system. So perhaps I had more in this one.
Allergens, like pollen, are nothing more than foreign plant antigens. When they get released into the air, you can see and hear the result. As part of the body's non-specific immune defense, the stimulus for sneezing gets triggered when allergens first enter the nasal tissue. Pollen allergens encounter the plasma cells in the nose, which respond by producing antibodies. These antibodies attach to mast cells, which are white blood cells containing the chemical histamine. As more antibodies are produced, they cause the mast cells to release histamine. Histamine then produces allergy symptoms. A stuffy and runny nose, sneezing, and watery eyes help to remove the invading pollen. Medications called antihistamines may be used to help alleviate severe allergy symptoms.
So sneezing and coughing are also part of our first line of defense, trying to get rid of those foreigners or things that your body is trying to attack and get rid of. That's about it for the immune system. So it is a little complicated in some ways, but again, I don't expect you to be able to write out exactly what happens in every step. You should have a general idea, maybe be able to put steps in order of what happens, but you should have a general idea, what's the difference between these two paths, the cellular immunity and the humoral immunity. What do they mean by specific immunity? So those two paths would be considered specific immunity versus the non-specific defenses that we have, so that we're always ready and armed with to try and attack new foreigners that are invading. Okay? Again, if you have any questions, please don't be scared to ask.